Oh, it is going to be recorded because my daughter's in Israel and she would love to hear she'll be able to get it later.
Yeah, it's going to be recorded, and just message Myra for the actual recording. So what we're doing now is going through the Pirkei Avot, the ethics of our fathers, and every week we've done a different chapter. This week we're continuing the theme of the 6th chapter, and the entire message and theme of all of the verses of the 6th chapter are about Torah and about the value of Torah and the acquisition of Torah. Now, something really interesting that I heard while I was preparing this class was that the 6th chapter of Pirkei Avot was actually originally not part of Ethics of Our Fathers. It was added. Why was it added? Because during the weeks from Passover to Shavuot, from when we left Egypt until when we got the Torah, there was a process of self-refinement that the Jewish people had to go through. The Jewish people had to learn how to go from being a closed-minded nation, so to speak, a nation that was always subject to a pharaoh, had to work as slaves. They were in a slavery mentality to becoming God's nation, to becoming a free nation, to becoming a people that are liberated by the thought and by the observance of Torah. And that doesn't happen overnight. That's something that happens with a lot of work, a lot of inner work. So to like kind of follow the ways of our ancestors, we also go through inner work from the times of Passover to Shavuot. One of the ways we do that is by learning Pirkei Avot, by learning ethics of our fathers. Ethics of our fathers is something that we learn primarily during the times of between Passover and Shavuot. And each of the chapters teach us about how we relate to other people, how we can progress in our Torah. There's so much that we learn from all the chapters of Pirkei Avot. But the 6th chapter talks a lot about Torah and about the value of Torah. Now, the 6th chapter, like I said before, was added to Pirkei Avot because there are 6 weeks between Passover and Shavuot, and there were originally only 5 chapters of Ethics of Our Fathers. So we needed one more chapter to learn in the 6th week. So we added another chapter. Who added the chapter, and why was this added? Now, the rabbi who compiled the Mishnah is all of the teachings that are additional to Torah and the teachings that support Torah. Torah can sometimes be very cryptic and not very explanatory. So the Mishnah is what aids us in studying Torah. Now, the Mishnah was originally not a book that was written down. The Mishnah was a bunch of teachings that were being circulated by different rabbis. There was one rabbi whose name was Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi, and he realized that something different was happening to the Jewish people. The Jewish people were starting to go through a diaspora period. Originally, all the Jewish people were living in Israel in this cocoon, and all the rabbis and everything was there in Israel. All the Torah was in Israel accessible. But now there were Jews that were moving far out into the diaspora. They were moving to Rome and Syria and many different places. And therefore, Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi said, it's time that we write down all of the rabbis' teachings into a book called the Mishnah. All of these kind of hearsay explanations about the Torah need to be properly written down. So that is the Mishnah. Part of the Mishnah is Ethics of Our Fathers. And Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi, this rabbi, what he did is he took a part of the Mishnah and he added it to make it the 6th chapter of Pirkei Avot. So we're going to discuss the 2nd verse of the 6th chapter of Pirkei Avot. It's a very long verse, but we're going to go through it step by step. So the verse starts it says that there's a voice that comes out from Mount Sinai. In the Mishnah, it also calls it Mount Horeb because that's another name for it. There's a verse that comes out from Mount Sinai, and it calls out saying that whoever insults Torah, like it says, the actual quote is, "Woe to creatures who insult the Torah." Why? Why is it problematic to insult Torah? Because Torah is the internal beauty of the Jewish people. Torah is the drive and what illuminates and makes us special people and beautiful. And the Mishnah actually compares it to two very interesting examples. It says, the Mishnah says, that somebody who insults Torah or somebody that goes against Torah is basically going against his own nature and going against who he truly is. And the Mishnah compares it to two things. The Mishnah says it's like a pig that has a gold ring in its nose, right? You look at the gold ring is beautiful, but why is it in the pig's nose? If it's so beautiful, it should be for something, for something or somebody who is beautiful. So that's something that's mismatched. Basically, it goes against our inner nature and it goes against who we really are to like put down or degrade Torah. And the second example it gives is like a beautiful woman who isn't kind, right? Then what is her beauty worth? The main essential thing is to be kind. So what the Mishnah is trying to teach us is that the Torah is the vitality, is our vitality. It's what gives us beauty and strength and just all of the life force that we have. So, and then the Mishnah continues and says that besides the Torah being our superpower, it says that the tablets, when we talk about the story of Mount Sinai, the tablets, the 10 Commandments, were created by God. How were they created? They were formed by God. They were actually blocks of sapphire, and the 10 Commandments were engraved in this sapphire. So the tablets were the work of God. God created these tablets. And the word that the Torah uses is engraved. And the words of the 10 Commandments were not written on the tablets. Because why weren't they written? Because ink and parchments are two separate entities. But when you engrave something into stone or diamond or into sapphire, it becomes a part of the material. So because the words of the 10 Commandments or the words of God were engraved into the tablets, it has something to teach us. And the Mishnah continues and says that the word engraved in Hebrew is charut, but if you add different vowels to the word charut, you have the word cherut. Cherut means freedom. And the Mishnah goes on to say that you could read that the words of God were engraved in the tablets, but they were also the words that gave us liberty. They were the words that gave us freedom to live as our truest self. Now, it's kind of interesting because when we talk about the notion of freedom, when we first think of freedom, the word connotes no limitations. The word freedom means that we are not restricted. Nothing is holding us back. And if we look at this cynically, we can say, okay, why are you calling the Torah freedom? There's nothing free about the Torah. There's a whole host of mitzvot that we have to keep. There's actually 613 mitzvot. And on Yom Kippur, we have to fast. And on Shabbat, we have to do this. And we have to do this to prepare for holidays. And we can't do this. And we're forbidden from doing this and that. There's so many things that Torah actually forbids us from doing. So why would the Mishnah compare Torah to freedom or liberty? What is it about Torah that has freedom to it? Now, we all know that there are many, many times in our life that we encounter a mitzvah, and it's a progress. It's like it takes progress to become used to a mitzvah or to follow the mitzvah and do the mitzvah and work on it. And that sounds like it doesn't come naturally, right? freedom has this message that sounds like, oh, when you're free, you're doing things that are natural to you. Now, what's fascinating about freedom is that, in a sense, as people, we're actually not free. If you were just put into this world, you as a person, because you are a limited person, you are not free by definition. For example, one of many examples I can give, you were born in a certain place. That means that all of your resources are limited to the place that you're born in. You cannot become successful in Singapore because you don't live in Singapore. You cannot meet certain people in life because there's only a certain amount of people that you're able to meet in life. As a physical person, you are essentially limited. And not only that, you can only do certain things because you are only endowed with certain talents. So as a person, you are actually limited by definition of being human. But what the Torah comes and does is that the Torah allows us to be a partner with God, allows us to be a partner with the divine. And then that puts us in an unlimited role. So how does that happen? Just naturally. Basically, God comes to us. This is how the process happens. We are created, we're limited beings. We have limited amount of contacts, limited amount of resources, limited amount of knowledge. And God comes to us and tells us that through doing the mitzvot and through following the Torah, we are able to go beyond ourselves. We are able to be more than who we are at first. And we're able to work on ourselves so that we can gain and accomplish so much more in life. So, for example, the mitzvah of chesed, right? Chesed is not only thinking about yourself. Chesed is allowing yourself to go out of your comfort zone at times. Doing chesed isn't easy. And you go out of your comfort zone, you do something that you wouldn't have naturally thought of. But because of the mitzvah of chesed, of doing kindness, and there's many, the mitzvah of chesed is an umbrella mitzvah that includes bikur cholim, visiting the sick, tzedakah. It includes a lot of different things. The Torah tells you, use your ability and your resources to do things for other people. That allows you to become a partner with the divine. It's almost like we're in a partnership with God. God tells us, listen, you are my ambassadors into this world. And I want you to follow the Torah so that you can affect so much change, so much good change. When we keep Shabbat, we are elevating our week. We make our week special and important, and not just physical, we make it spiritual. And there's so many different things that we do, so many mitzvot that we do that allow us to look bigger picture and basically say that we are ambassadors into this world. God put us here in order for us to progress, in order for us to come out of our comfort zone. And that is freedom. Freedom is not staying in the confines of your home and your mind. Freedom is allowing yourself to understand something differently, see things differently, to go places that you've never gone to. And the Torah allows us to do that. Through the mitzvot of the Torah, it allows us to become different people than what we originally had in mind. Now, that sounds very nice. It sounds very beautiful. But at the same time, we have to hold on to the idea that Torah could also be very limiting. There are certain things that we are not allowed to do according to Torah. And in order to answer this, why is Torah so limiting? We go back to what the Mishnah says, that the words of God were engraved in the 10 tablets. They weren't written. And just like an engraving, the actual material and the actual words are created at the same time, When God created us, he actually created Torah at the same time. He created us with and through the knowledge of Torah. So what the Mishnah is telling us is that we are able to live our truest selves by following the Torah's laws, because it's like an engraved tablet. We are so connected and we are so part and parcel with the Torah, even when we don't realize it, that when you follow the Torah, you are living your best self. And being limited is not a negative thing. The Lubavitch Rebbe compares limitation and freedom to a laser beam. A laser beam is a powerful, powerful beam of light that is able to go many, many, many far miles more than what its source is. And what's interesting about the laser beam is that its power and its potency is why is it so strong? Why is it so direct? Because the laser beam is designed to be in a straight line. The laser beam is not like a light bulb that emits light in a circular way. The laser beam emits light in a very, very straightforward way. It's just one strong beam of light. And because the laser is limited, so to speak, that's why it can have such a far impact. So freedom and limitation are compared to a laser beam. In order to have a very, very far-reaching impact, there has to be boundaries. There has to be a direction. A laser beam is limited. It has one move, one direction, and it's also very, very powerful because it has those boundaries, so to speak. When we create boundaries in our life, we are able to really become and flower into special people. And we know this with educating children, right? Just like children need boundaries in order to become good children, we as humans, we need boundaries in our life in order for us not to become clouded, in order for us not to become confused. When we live a life according to Torah and we live with the values of Torah, and the values of Torah are values that a lot of us don't even realize are so part and parcel of who we are, because we were created in mind to keep the Torah. When God created us, he wanted us to keep the Torah. And he said, this is going to be the mission of these people. These people, these humans, are going to be ambassadors of Torah values. And Torah values include human life, putting human life first, putting the feelings of others first, treating each other as one. Somebody actually recently pointed out something very, very interesting to me. He said to me that notice how the synagogue keeps all types of people together. We all come together to celebrate Shabbos. There's no caste system in Judaism. Now, in many other cultures, like, for example, in Indian culture, there's something called the caste system. And the family that you're born into, depending on how much money that family makes or their status in the community, that's who that family is. And that family does not mingle with families that are in a lower financial state than them. In Judaism, we don't believe in that. In Judaism, we believe in the community is together. The community we're a wholesome community. We all have so much to give and to share because we are not defined by how much money we make. And we are not defined by our worth, by our external worth, because we have an internal worth. And that is brought out by synagogue, by shul. All of us get together on Shabbos. We're all one Jewish people. That's all that matters. And in society, somebody who is, for example, a very successful businessman never has any interactions with homeless people, right? It's a pretty extreme example that I'm giving, but my point is that a lot of people in society, they stick within the confines of their social group. But in Judaism, we don't believe in that. In Judaism, we believe to integrate each other into our community. We're a community. We all have something to give and something to share with each other. Now, the Mishnah continues, and says its final quote. And the final quote is that there is no free man except one who occupies himself in Torah. So the Mishnah is basically teaching us that there is no such thing as somebody who is free. Freedom is elusive. Freedom, when we try to understand what freedom is and what freedom is, like there's so many ways you can define freedom. And the Torah says there are people that think that they are free, but they're actually not living a life of freedom, because you could be living a life of freedom externally, right? But you might not be free of your internal thoughts or internal worries. We're always going to be bound by something. And the idea of freedom is that when you have freedom, the definition of freedom is that you are able to access parts of yourself that you weren't able to access before. And that's done through learning Torah. Now, what's very interesting is that the Mishnah uses the word occupies in Torah. The Mishnah says there is no free man except one who occupies himself in Torah. Now, occupies, the word occupy in Hebrew is osek. And osek is also a word that we use when we talk about business. The word osek is a word that's connected to business. And what the Mishnah is telling us is that the way that we engage in Torah and the way that we keep Torah is modeled in a business-like way. There's two main things that help support and help run a business. The first thing is that you don't sit in your shop and say, whoever comes to me will come to me, and that will be my customers. Part of a business is that you encourage other people to know about your business. You spread the message of your business. You advertise. When there's so much money and resources that are put into advertising, because we understand that we have to teach others about what product we have available. They might not know about it, right? So staying in the confines of your comfort zone, so to speak, and saying, whoever wants my business is able to come, and all those with people that I'll serve, is not a good business model, because you're failing to advertise. Advertising is essential to business because it allows you to reach way more many people than you were able to initially. When I put an ad on Instagram, or I put up a billboard sign, or I put up a poster, there are people that I don't know that will hear about my business. Same thing about Torah. When we learn Torah, we shouldn't only keep it to ourselves. We should also learn Torah together. We should learn Torah from other people. We should teach Torah. So what we're doing right now is we're learning Torah together. That's beautiful. That's amazing. That's exactly the point of Torah. We seek to learn from people who are able to teach Torah, like Rabbi Scheiner, for example, my father, listening to his sermons. We come every week to shul and we leave knowing something new. And then the main thing is you teaching Torah. The Lubavitch Rebbe had an amazing line that he always said and he promoted and he spoke about. The line is, when you know Aleph, you teach Aleph. Even if you know something small or if you know something short, you still have an obligation to teach it because there's somebody else that doesn't know what you know. So in a way, we are all connected through the study of Torah, and that allows us to become free, and it unhinges us from the limitations of being just ourselves and just closed in to our own mentality. When we learn with others, when we learn from others, and when we teach others, we connect in a way that we've never connected before. So OSEC, business, a business model that we can implement in our Torah learning is to advertise, encourage others to learn, and also by spreading the values of Torah. Just by being a Jew that follows Torah, you make an impression on other people. that is very subtle, but at the same time, very, very powerful. The second way that business is compared to Torah is in its mobility. When you run a business or when you have a profession or a trade, part of running your business is always being interested in new ways to run your business, or new ways of understanding the market, new techniques. You always want to learn more personally, and that is going to add to your business. For example, if you're an artist, you're at the same time, while you're selling art, while you're making art, you're also learning more about art, because that is going to aid you in your business. My aunt and uncle, they run a watch business, and my aunt tells me she's always listening to business podcasts because she's able to learn so much more about trade through learning about what's current. And the way to learn about what's current is by listening to podcasts and listening to other business professionals. So in business, there's a mentality of mobility. We are always moving upwards. We are always gaining more information. And in Torah, when we learn Torah, we are always continuing. It's a never-ending cycle. Learning Torah, there's never a point where we say, okay, I learned all the Torah that I could. I learned all of the stories of the Torah. I know exactly what they mean, and I can move on. The depth of Torah is that there are so many layers and interpretations that one could go on and on and on and be an amazing scholar, but there's still more to learn. And realizing that is also having a reverence for Torah. It's saying that I don't know everything, and there's more for me to learn in life. So when a person is occupied or osek in Torah, he is somebody who, number one, learns with others, learns from others, and teaches. But the main thing is that he realizes that he's never done learning, and there's always more to be learned. And the idea of that there's no free man except for one who occupies himself in Torah is that, yes, Torah is something that could be looked at as limiting or not let us do certain things. But at the same time, when we keep Torah, we are creating a roadmap for ourselves. We are creating guidelines for ourselves, and we are following in a way of truth, and that allows us to make an even further impact than we were able to initially. So I'm sure there are many stories about this, about how Torah is able to have an impact on others and an impact on yourself, and allow yourself to go out of a limited mentality and to go into a limitless mentality. There's an interesting story that's brought down in the Mishnah. And the Mishnah speaks about a famous rabbi whose name was Rabbi Yossi. And he's traveling on his way, and he meets somebody who tells him, Rabbi, where do you come from? And the rabbi says, I come from a big city. It's full of scholars. It's full of Torah learners and Torah learning, sorry. And the man says, listen, Rabbi, I'll pay you a hefty price if you move to our community and you become the rabbi of our community. And the rabbi says to him, there's nothing that I would trade for living in a place that has a lot of Torah study. And the most important thing to me, the rabbi says, is to live in a place that has Torah study, and no amounts in the world can persuade me from living somewhere else. So that's the Mishnah. And it's a short Mishnah. And initially, when you look at it, you say, okay, did the rabbi squander an opportunity for outreach? The rabbi can have moved to a new city and also have started a new business, so to speak, of teaching other people Torah. Did he put down this offer? and a deeper look into the Mishnah is that he did not reject the offer. He actually ended up moving to the city, and he ended up becoming the rabbi and teaching the people of the city. But what he was telling this man was that I'm not moving somewhere because of money, and I'm not moving somewhere because I'm going to become the figurehead of the community. I'm only going to move somewhere if we are able to transform this city into a city of Torah. And the idea of Torah is that it is something that we are able to share, and it is something that we are able to spread. And when we share and when we spread the lessons of Torah, the stories of Torah, the teachings of Torah, the mentality of the Torah, we are able to create a society that is truly, truly free. A society that lives with an inner peace and an inner truth. That's freedom. Living your truest self is freedom. Doing things that are against yourself, so to speak, doing things that are not positive to your well-being are the opposite of Torah. So just in a way that we can illustrate this, we compared Torah to a laser beam. We compared Torah to an engraved stone. We compared the lack of Torah to a beautiful woman who isn't kind. When you have Torah, you have an inner vitality and an inner beauty that just shines through. And I'm saying vague terms like have Torah, learn Torah, teach Torah. What does that mean? On a practical level, let's discuss what does it mean to be a Torah Jew? Being a Torah Jew means to implement the teachings of Torah and the values of Torah and the mitzvot into our lives. And all of us are born with a mission in this world. And our mission is very much tied with our talents, our personality traits, and surprisingly, the things that are most difficult for us. When we have a struggle in any certain area, God is whispering to us, and God is telling us, do you know why you have that struggle? Because you are able to affect change and make it a positive outcome, specifically in this area. It's just going to take a little bit of work, and you can do it. It's God telling us that even though it's hard, we can do hard things. Just like when we're raising children, if something is difficult for a child, if a child says, I can't do math is too hard, we do not tell the child, okay, because you're not good at math, you don't have to do math. You could just stick to history because you're a good history student. We encourage our children to try to flex their muscles in things that are hard for them. And a lot of the mitzvot are hard for us, or not easy. It's not easy to go out of our comfort zone and be kind to somebody that we don't feel like we want to be kind to. Or it's not easy necessarily to give tzedakah. And it's not easy to keep Shabbat, and it's not easy to keep kosher. But God tells us when we do mitzvot, and all of us know that there are certain mitzvot that we have a harder time with, but we're able to stretch our muscles, and God is telling us, I believe in you. You can do hard things. And through doing mitzvot that are not easy, we're able to come to a deeper appreciation of who we are. We're able to look more internally into who we are and to understand which values are important to us. And I don't think that ever stops, you know. Sometimes in different times of your life, certain mitzvah will become more difficult than others. And the mentality is, the proper mentality is to look at this Mishnah and say, there's a liberating quality to keeping Torah. It liberates us in the way that it teaches us that we can go beyond ourselves. Recently, me and my husband were in Aruba, and we were taking over the Chabad of Aruba. It was very, very cool experience. And we didn't have many responsibilities. The main responsibility was just to keep the Chabad house open while the rabbi was away, and also to run Shabbat services. Now, the rabbi has a kosher food service out of his house that's run by, she's a non-Jewish lady, but she cooks all the kosher food in his house and she delivers it. And we didn't really have anything to do with that. Around 11 p.m. one night, I get a text from a tourist in Aruba, and she texts me and she says that the lady that runs the kosher food service made the delivery to her hotel. She delivered the kosher food, but the front desk threw it out. So the front desk threw out an entire order of schnitzel, hamburgers, bread, fruit, cakes, tons of food. And it was kosher food, and this family only keeps kosher. And now they don't have any food. And she said, I know it's 11 p.m. They came back from whatever night tour that they were doing. They were expecting to pick up their kosher food, and now they don't have any food. She's like, I know I don't want to bother you and trouble you, but I'm wondering if there's any extra food left over at the Chabad house. And there wasn't. So I just said to her, you know what? I'm going to make you some food. We'll bring it over in 20 minutes. And me and my husband, we started putting on the grill. We whipped up hamburgers, grilled chicken. We put on the deep fryer, French fries, grilled vegetables. We made her a whole nother meal. And it wasn't hard because there was already food prepared for the next day. So the meat was defrosted. I was able to put it on the grill. But what was interesting is that I had a very interesting thought to myself. And a lot of the Chabad rabbis and Rebbetzins, when they travel, when they choose to live in a remote location, the Rebbetzin is basically committing herself to being a caterer, so to speak, because she's making kosher food for everyone. And I used to think to myself, like, oh my gosh, I would never want to do that. I would never want to cook. I have friends that have Chabad houses in obscure locations, and that's what they do. I have a classmate that she runs Chabad of Turks and Caicos, and then I have another schoolmate that runs Chabad of Maui, and a lot of their jobs and a lot of their roles is to make food, kosher food for tourists. And I remember thinking to myself, like, wow, I would never want to just cook all day. And when I was cooking for this couple at 11 p.m., I was thinking to myself, you know what? There is such value behind this because we are sending the message to other people that keeping kosher is not a burden. And keeping kosher should never be looked at something as a negative thing. We should never look at keeping kosher as, oh, this is so annoying that I'm not able to eat half of what's the food that's around me. But it's putting the value back into keeping kosher food, and it's putting the specialness into keeping kosher food. And when we were able to make kosher food for somebody at like midnight, the message that we sent right away to that couple is that it's not a big deal. Keeping kosher is not something that should trouble you or worry you, and it's something that we should be proud of. And I thought that was very special because there's always a mentality shift that we're able to put on into our brains, that we're able to look at different mitzvot. And sometimes our initial thought can be, oh, this is limiting, this is hard, this is difficult. And psychologically, the reason why we think things negatively first is because this is very interesting. I just learned this the other week, that our brain sometimes the first thing that our brains jump to is a negative thought or a negative way of viewing things. And why is that? Because our memory holds on to experiences to teach us for the next time. So, for example, if you were a substitute teacher and you come home and your spouse or your friend or your sister or your mother says to you, "How was it?" You say, "Great, but," and then you follow by saying something that wasn't positive about it. A lot of us do that. And the reason that we do that is because our brains are trying to teach us something for next time, right? It's not because we're negatively predisposed people. It's because our brains are always trying to tell us next time we can do it better. So how can we do it better next time? And so we hold on to negative memories. The problem is when we continue that, and that just becomes our language. When negativity or negative memories or thoughts become our language, that's when we know we have to stop it. And we're all able to switch our mentality and put on a positive mentality. So sometimes I try this exercise when I have an experience and then I come home and then my husband asks me, "How was it?" I try not to express that negative thought that I have. And I try to hold on to what was good about it. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Like this week was the camp. So I was the art teacher in camp this week and last week, and it was a lot of fun. There's nothing I love more than teaching kids art, but at the same time, it is such a balagan. It is a huge balagan teaching kids art. This one kid says to me, he says, "Mora Hindy, can I splatter paint on my canvas?" And I'm like, "Sure, of course you could splatter paint on your canvas." And then the kids leave and I realize there's tons of paint on the floor. So then when I come home after an hour or so of scraping all that paint off of the floor, and my husband says to me, "How was it?" The first thing I want to say is, "Oh my gosh, I was scraping off paint from the floor for an hour." But I tried to put a stop sign in my brain and I said, "It was great. I had a good time. The kids had a lot of energy, and some of it was challenging, but overall I love teaching kids." And when it comes to keeping mitzvot, we are able to do the same thing. We are able to pause our thoughts on the limiting qualities of mitzvot, because there are limiting parts of mitzvot. For example, keeping kosher. You go on vacation, you could only eat at one restaurant, and there's so many restaurants available, or so many dishes and cuisines that are open to you. But no, I'm choosing to keep kosher, so I'm only going to have the salad or the pasta, or I'm only going to eat at a kosher restaurant. And we're able to shift our mentality and say, there's a limiting way to look at this, but there's also an unlimited way to look at this, and say, when I am choosing to keep mitzvot, I am giving myself access to the truest me. The truest me is that I am a partner with God. I'm an ambassador into my world, and I'm an ambassador into my environment. And for example, when a chesed opportunity comes up, a chesed opportunity that isn't so much fun, or it's not something that we want to do, we tell ourselves, I can become a partner with God in this. And God wants me and believes in me to keep this mitzvah, and I'm able to do this. And then when we're able to make that step, we walk into a zone of freedom. And the whole message of the whole chapter 6 of Pirkei Avot is that we acquire Torah through, yes, hard work, but at the same time, through belief that God believes in us, and the knowledge that God believes in us. And just like a laser beam has a direction, it has a point, the Torah gives us direction. And so many people are walking around today wondering what their purpose in life is. And it's a very painful question, because it makes you feel inadequate, and it makes you feel like, am I the only one that is struggling with this question? But having a life of direction and purpose gives us a backbone, and it makes us realize that We are not put into this world arbitrarily. If we're put into this world, it's because God believes in us and because God believes that we have something to offer and share. And may we all merit to experience that with certain individual mitzvot and to overcome the boundaries and the hardships that we have and be able to really internalize mitzvot and make them ours. So my mission statement for this class as we end summer and we're going into the month of Elul. The month of Elul is the prep month before the high holidays. It's where we take assessment of our entire year, just like a businessman. We spoke about business before. A businessman takes an assessment of his whole year, all of his accounts, in order to progress, in order to do better next year. The month of Elul is an assessment time. We look at our year and we say, okay, where did I do good? Where did I do not as well? And where can I work on? What can I work on to make the next year even better? So that's what's cool about the month of Elul. The month of Elul is a pause month where we pause mentally and we just take a look. We are invited to take a look at our past year and make resolutions for the next year. That's what's something that's very interesting about New Year's resolutions. A lot of New Year's resolutions are made on the spot, quickly, and because they're made quickly and sometimes impulsively, it's hard for us to keep them. The month of Elul is the prerequisite to New Year's resolutions. On Rosh Hashanah, we make New Year's resolutions, and in the month of Elul, we think about our New Year's resolutions. We say, okay, what are the things that I want to add into my year to make them special? What mitzvahs do I want to take ownership of? What are mitzvahs that were hard for me to keep this past year, but I want to do better in the following year? Am I really being as kind and as nice as I ought to be? Am I really being as helpful as I ought to be? And all the different thoughts that we have. So one of the ways that we can do this is a lot of us have different zones in our life. We have our family, we have our community, we have our business, and we can write down the different zones in our life, and we could write things that we are proud of ourselves in the past year. I'm proud that I made an effort to become friends with my fellow employees, or I'm proud of my progression in attending synagogue, or I'm proud in the way that I maintain this relationship. And then at the same time, look at ways that we want to continue and say, and in this upcoming year, I would love to do this, and I would love to progress in this way. And that is the theme of the month of Elul. So this Shabbat is actually Rosh Chodesh, and the whole theme of the Shabbat is preparing for the high holidays. And through preparing for the high holidays, we allow ourselves, through putting up boundaries, so to speak, and making, at the end of the day, resolutions could be also looked at as boundaries. But they're not boundaries because they're giving us direction. So we're able to give ourselves direction and put up safeguards for our year in order for us to have the best year yet. So I want to wish everyone a Shabbat Shalom. And wherever you are, I'm going to be spending Shabbat here in Georgia. And if you're in Florida or New York, very soon we're all going to be reunited for the high holidays and see each other soon. And I wish everyone an amazing Shabbat. Thank you so much for joining. All right. Stop recording.